The maternity ward was unusually quiet that afternoon, filled with the soft beeping of monitors and the muted footsteps of nurses moving from room to room. Outside one of the rooms, however, tension hung thick in the air. A sharply dressed older woman stood rigidly in the hallway, her lips pressed into a thin line of disapproval. She was the mother-in-law, and her eyes were fixed on the young woman inside the room as if she were an intruder rather than a new mother who had just given birth hours earlier. The daughter-in-law lay weakly in the hospital bed, pale and exhausted, her newborn sleeping beside her. Instead of comfort or congratulations, she was met with harsh words. The older woman's voice cut through the quiet corridor, accusing, cold, and relentless. She claimed the young woman had no right to be there, that she had embarrassed the family, that she should leave immediately. Nurses exchanged uneasy glances but hesitated to intervene, sensing this was more than a simple disagreement. "You're abandoned," the mother-in-law snapped, her tone dripping with contempt. "Don't pretend you belong here. You're rushing to the wrong station in life." Each word landed like a blow. The young mother's eyes filled with tears, not just from pain but from humiliation and disbelief. This was supposed to be one of the most important moments of her life, yet she was being pushed out as if she were nothing. As the confrontation escalated, voices carried down the hallway, drawing attention from visitors and staff alike. The mother-in-law seemed emboldened by the audience, her posture stiff, her chin raised as she listed grievances that had clearly been building for years. The daughter-in-law tried to respond, but her voice was weak, her strength spent. She clutched the edge of the blanket, focusing on her baby, as if that tiny presence was the only thing anchoring her to the moment. Then, unexpectedly, the atmosphere shifted. A sudden stir at the end of the corridor caught everyone's attention. Conversations quieted as a familiar figure appeared, walking calmly but with purpose. It was Robert Irwin, unexpectedly present due to a charity visit to the hospital earlier that day. His appearance alone was enough to cause murmurs, but it was the look on his face that truly changed the mood. He had heard the raised voices and stopped, curiosity turning quickly into concern. Robert approached, listening silently for a moment as the mother-in-law continued her tirade. His expression darkened, not with anger alone, but with disbelief. When he finally spoke, his voice was firm, controlled, yet unmistakably intense. He questioned what right anyone had to treat a new mother this way, especially in a place meant for healing and compassion. His words cut through the noise, forcing everyone to pause. The mother-in-law turned, clearly startled, her confidence faltering for the first time. She recognized him instantly, and the realization seemed to drain the color from her face. She tried to defend herself, stumbling through excuses about family honor and tradition, but the authority she had wielded moments before was gone. Robert didn't raise his voice, but his presence was commanding, his disappointment evident. He spoke about respect, about empathy, and about how moments like childbirth were sacred, not opportunities for cruelty. He reminded everyone listening that strength wasn't found in dominance but in kindness. The hallway was silent now, every ear tuned in. Even the nurses had stopped, standing still as if afraid to break the moment. The daughter-in-law watched in disbelief, tears quietly slipping down her cheeks. She hadn't expected anyone to step in, least of all someone like Robert Irwin. For the first time since the confrontation began, she felt seen and protected. The baby stirred softly, unaware of the drama unfolding just feet away. The mother-in-law tried once more to assert herself, but her words came out hollow. The power dynamic had shifted completely. With calm but unmistakable finality, Robert made it clear that hospital staff would be informed if the harassment continued. He suggested, pointedly, that the older woman take time to reflect on her behavior before speaking again. Defeated and humiliated, the mother-in-law fell silent. She stood there for a moment, frozen, before turning away without another word. The sound of her footsteps fading down the corridor felt like the release of a held breath. Slowly, the tension dissipated, replaced by a quiet sense of relief. Robert turned to the young mother, his tone softening instantly. He offered a few gentle words of encouragement, reminding her that she was strong, that she deserved support, and that she wasn't alone. The nurses resumed their duties, one of them stepping in to ensure the mother was comfortable and safe. As Robert walked away, the hallway buzzed softly with whispered conversations, the story already beginning to spread. What had started as a moment of cruelty had been transformed into one of unexpected solidarity. The daughter-in-law looked down at her child, a faint smile appearing through her tears. Despite everything, she felt hope. In the most unlikely way, a sudden guest had changed everything, leaving behind a lesson that no one present would soon forget. The hospital smelled faintly of antiseptic and fresh linen, a sterile calm that usually soothed anxious families. That day, however, the calm was shattered by a sharp, unforgiving voice echoing through the maternity ward. A mother-in-law stood near the doorway of a private room, her posture rigid, her eyes blazing with resentment. Inside the room, a young woman lay exhausted after childbirth, her body aching, her heart heavy. The newborn beside her slept peacefully, unaware of the storm gathering around its mother. The older woman wasted no time with pleasantries. She accused the young mother of ruining her son's life, of trapping him with responsibility, of bringing shame rather than joy. Her words were deliberate and cruel, chosen to wound. She insisted the daughter-in-law did not belong there, that she should leave the hospital immediately and stop pretending she was part of the family. Each sentence seemed rehearsed, as if this confrontation had been planned long before the baby was born. The young mother tried to speak, but her voice trembled. She had imagined this moment differently: support, relief, maybe even reconciliation. Instead, she felt stripped of dignity in the most vulnerable hours of her life. Nurses passed by, slowing their steps, unsure whether to intervene or wait. Other visitors lingered at a distance, pretending not to listen while catching every word. "You're abandoned," the mother-in-law declared, her voice rising. "Don't fool yourself. You're rushing to the wrong station, thinking this child gives you a place here." The phrase landed heavily, and the silence that followed was thick with discomfort. The daughter-in-law turned her face toward the window, blinking back tears, refusing to give the older woman the satisfaction of seeing her break completely. What the mother-in-law did not notice was that the noise had drawn attention beyond the immediate area. At the far end of the corridor, a small group accompanying Robert Irwin had paused. He was at the hospital for a scheduled visit connected to wildlife conservation outreach and children's health programs, smiling moments earlier, greeting staff and families. The raised voices changed his expression instantly. He excused himself from his group and walked toward the source of the commotion. As he approached, he listened quietly, absorbing the harshness of the words being thrown at a woman who could barely sit upright. His jaw tightened. He had grown up watching his parents stand up for compassion, respect, and fairness, and what he was witnessing felt fundamentally wrong. When the mother-in-law continued, oblivious to his presence, he finally stepped forward. "Is there a reason you think this is acceptable?" he asked calmly, his voice firm but not loud. The effect was immediate. The mother-in-law turned sharply, ready to defend herself, then froze when she recognized him. Her confidence wavered, and for the first time, she seemed unsure of her position. The hallway grew quiet, all eyes shifting between them. She attempted to explain, talking about family values, about disappointment, about mistakes that needed consequences. Her words sounded weak now, stripped of the authority she believed she held. Robert listened, then shook his head slightly. He spoke about how childbirth was one of the most physically and emotionally demanding experiences a person could endure, and how cruelty at such a moment revealed far more about the speaker than the target. He did not insult her. He did not shout. Instead, he spoke with controlled intensity, emphasizing empathy, responsibility, and the lasting damage caused by words spoken in anger. He reminded her that a newborn child deserved to enter the world surrounded by care, not conflict. The simplicity of his message made it impossible to twist or dismiss. The mother-in-law opened her mouth to argue, then closed it again. The eyes around her, staff, visitors, even strangers, no longer reflected passive curiosity but quiet judgment. Her shoulders sagged slightly, and she looked away, suddenly aware of how isolated she had become. Without another word, she turned and walked down the corridor, her footsteps quick and uneven, as if retreating from a battle she had lost. A nurse immediately stepped into the room, gently closing the door partway to give the new mother privacy. The young woman's hands were shaking, adrenaline finally draining from her body. Robert turned his attention to her, his expression softening. He offered reassurance, telling her she had done nothing wrong, that strength sometimes meant enduring far more than anyone should have to. His words were simple, but they carried weight. The daughter-in-law nodded, tears slipping silently down her cheeks. She looked at her baby, then back at him, gratitude clear in her eyes. In that moment, the humiliation and fear she had felt were replaced by a fragile sense of safety. Someone had seen her, had chosen to stand beside her without hesitation. When Robert left the room, the hallway slowly returned to its usual rhythm. Yet something lingered in the air, a quiet awareness among those who had witnessed the scene. Conversations resumed in hushed tones, not with gossip, but with reflection. People carried on with their day, but the image of a powerful figure calmly dismantling cruelty with compassion stayed with them. Inside the room, the young mother rested, her baby now awake, tiny fingers curling instinctively. She whispered promises she barely had the strength to make, but meant with her whole heart. The pain of the confrontation would not disappear overnight, but it no longer defined the day. In a place meant for new beginnings, an unexpected intervention had transformed a moment of despair into one of resilience. The hospital would forget the incident soon enough, replaced by countless other stories of birth and recovery. But for one woman, that day would always be remembered, not just for the arrival of her child, but for the moment someone unexpected stepped in and reminded her that dignity and kindness could still prevail, even in the face of deep family wounds.